Hey guys, Matt Science here, and today I am back for episode number 7 of r/ProRevenge. And today I have yet another 3 stories lined up. One of them is really short, two of them are pretty decent length. Don't really get much in the terms of how long a story is on the side. I really wish I could have that for each subreddit, like just the flares on the side, so it'd be like, ooh, do I want to read a long story today or a short story today? Rather than having to try and go through and find them. Anyways, I'm gonna stop ranting about that. Let's get into these stories. First story: thief tried to steal my car, accidentally filled it up with gas, and brought it back to me instead. My first car was a 1984 Jeep CJ7, a pretty sweet ride for a dirt poor teenager in the 90s. I was working midnights at a gas station and loaned it to my brother, who was taking a date to a party. I got a call around 1 AM from my brother, who told me he left the keys in the Jeep and it was stolen. I was devastated. I was still on the phone with my brother when the thieves pulled my Jeep into the gas station to fill up on gas. As luck would have it, the gas gauge on my Jeep was broken and always read empty. I worked at the only 24-hour gas stations in the area. I pressed the silent alarm and proceeded to fill up my Jeep. It was a full service station. When the thieves were out of the Jeep, I saw an opportunity to slip the key out of the ignition and into my pocket. They paid for the gas and argued amongst each other who had the keys last. The delay was enough for the police to arrive. I had to explain the story to the officer half a dozen times before he understood. The thieves had this stunned look of disbelief on their faces I'll never forget. The cops were barely laughing, telling the story to dispatch. All the while, the thieves sat in cuffs in the back of the squad car. The story made most of the major newspapers the following day. It's just like, your car gets stolen, and you're on your phone to your brother, and all you just see is the car roll up. It's like, I gotta go, and it's just like, just perfect. Steal the key back, and they just stand around, just like, who had the key last? Who had the key last? Oh my gosh. Okay, let's move on to this story. I got back at childhood bullies by destroying an entire town. Pardon for my English, as it isn't my first language. I was browsing r/Ask Reddit and came across a thread about whatever happened to that trench coat kid at your school. I was that trench coat kid, and I came back in town and destroyed it years ago. As background, I grew up in a little conservative little town in a conservative rural area, heavily dominated by religion. This makes people put great stock on moral purity in appearances. Keeping up the facade is the most important thing. Everyone must go to church weekly, and people are heavily judged for appearing sinful. This was a bad thing for me, as the cards were heavily stacked against me from birth. You see, I'm a rap baby. My mother lost her parents when she was young and was taken in by her uncle and aunt. The uncle had an important position in the religious hierarchy, so when he and a couple of his friends started sexually abusing my mum, it was ignored by everyone. When she got pregnant, it was painted as showing that she's a harlot running around seducing married men, in fact. She was cast out. Why she didn't move out of the town, I don't know, but yeah. There I came into the picture, born out of wedlock and with no father, branded as a sinful outcast. My childhood was shit. I don't go into details, but enough to say that by the time I started going to school, I was quite damaged. School made it worse. I was bullied relentlessly. Teachers were part of it since they were all part of the religious community, which saw me as stained. Imagine being the only black kid in a town run by KKK, and you get close to how it was. So yeah, in school I became that trenchcoat kid, or its local cultural equivalent. I became weird and hostile and purpose to turn people off. People would cast me into the mold of being damaged and stained. So yeah, I took it and turned it into something to protect myself with. Despite all this opposition, I managed to graduate with decent grades. A distant aunt, my only decent relative, helped me get into a college in an actual city. She was the black sheep of the family and saw herself in me, maybe. Around this time, my mother drank herself to death. Oh, far out. Can't blame her for it. She had a life insurance policy that helped me study. City life liberated me. I went into therapy and managed to treat the wounds that town had sliced into me. I got rid of that shitty town, but I guess some part of it never left me. Years went by. I became a sort of analytical consultant. I work for an international company that does sort of out-of-the-box analysis for other companies. I won't go into details to protect my identity, but we assist in solving all kinds of situations. Well, in my line of work, I'm sometimes called in to help downsizing operations. This sucks. I feel for the people who get fired, but if I wouldn't do it, someone else would. A couple of years ago, I got an assignment to go to 3 different factories and assess their wholesale, then come with a suggestion on which of them to move abroad. My hometown was among these 3 factories. You see, the shitty town I grew up in was one of those one smokestack towns, like we say in my country. There was one factory and some agriculture. Everyone worked in those jobs, like 60% of people in the factory. Rest of the economy rolled around supporting the factory and the people working there. Most of the people were looking forward at nothing but a job at the factory after getting out of school. The religious community running the town ran the factory as well. The big shots in the community tended to be bosses in the factory. This meant that the factory wasn't run that well. Promotions were based on holiness, not merit or skill. The trip back to the hometown was glorious. Most people didn't recognize me at first. The chubby outcast had become outwards just another corporate drone. I inspected all the paperwork, listened to all their speeches and lies, audited the processes. In the process, I dropped hints and they finally got who I was. The factory people threw me a party then for the old time's sake. Many of my old school buddies were there. We remembered fake good times together. I threw shadow on every part by pulling up some certain event of bullying that I had endured, just see the atmosphere turn awkward. Then I laughed at it like it was always a joke, and I had grown out of it. Inside I was seething with hatred and enjoying all of this. I really loved seeing their faces, seeing what they had become, because fuck it, I was going to take it all away from them. In the end, they seemed relieved, believing that they were lucky it was me doing the audit, that the hometown boy would protect them. My visit, lasting a couple of days, was over. After my visit, lasting a couple of days, was over, I cruised around the town in my rented car just to see how the people lived and to remember what it was like. My state of mind was something close to sexual arousal. I never understood why people pursue positions of power, but yeah, now I understood. The rest is, as they say, history. I wrote a really scathing report documenting every little flaw and mistake ever done in the town plant. I didn't need to lie or fabricate. I simply took things that existed and polished them until they looked even worse than they were before. The factory was shut down, and in the following 3 years, the town died. No business venture ever came to replace it. Drug use and alcohol use spiked, as did crime and domestic violence. Lives fell apart, families fell apart. They still haven't recovered, save for a few brighter souls who moved away. I still stalk them on social media sometimes, enjoying how shitty their lives are. How they all finally got to pay for what they did to me and my mum. I don't feel a slight bit of remorse. If I could do it all again, I would. I would only make it so that I could be present to watch when they received the news about the factory being shut down. Hell, in my fantasy of the version of the events, I'd stay in town for a year just to see everyone fall apart. In reality, I'll only go there back once. When my uncle finally dies, I'm going to go and piss on his grave. You gotta water your go water the plants that grow over your uncle. Oh yeah, I love how you just end it with, "I'm gonna go piss on my uncle's grave when he's dead." That's like logical. No, you gotta go above and beyond. You don't just do the pee. You don't just pee. You do a poo as well. Poo on his grave and then just walk away. Just walk away. Sure, you might have some brown underwear when you get home, but you got to poop on your uncle. Is that too far? My foster parents treated me like crap, so I obliterated their reputation in our small town. My parents were both killed in a hit-and-run car accident when I was 10. My dad was only 39 and my mum 35. Neither of them had relatives who could take me in. We lived in a really small, church-going town where everyone knew one another. Is this the same town as before? My dad had been the heir to a small fortune, and so didn't really have to work. He didn't like the big city, so him and my mum decided to move to a small town where we could have an antique store. My mum was into collecting antiques. I would have had to go to the orphanage. I would have had to go the orphanage route when they died, but this couple from the church, who are called Mr. and Mrs. Banks, made this big to-do in church about how a little girl needs a loving home, and God has given us this joyous task of bringing her up in our home and hearts. It's been a long time, and I don't remember if those were Mrs. Banks' exact words, but they were something cringeworthy like that. The Banks had their own daughter, Kitty. That's a good choice of name. Who was a year older than me. That should have meant we would be super good friends, but Kitty had her own thing going and practically ignored me. She was a holier-than-thou type. The Banks received a stipend from the state to take care of me, but they also received checks every month from my dad's estate, which was supposed to take care of me until I was 18. When I did turn 18, I would receive full control of my inheritance. The Banks weren't exactly cruel to me, but in private, it was clear they were just using me to build up their reputation in town. In front of other people, they fawned over me in a sick, cotton candy fashion that made me uncomfortable. They also made Kitty be nice to me in public, which she resented. The Banks would also put on a big show whenever social workers came to check up on me. They'd coach me before the lady would come and tell me to praise how godly and wonderful they were. After the social worker left, they'd go right back to ignoring me and spending my dad's money on crap on the internet or on trips. It was clear to me, even as a tween and teen, that the banks were only using some of my endowment, both from the state and from my trust, to take care of me. The rest they spent on themselves. As I grew older, I could see that my foster parents would pretend as though they had great business acumen, and that's why they had more money and could buy a new Volvo. Where I'm from, a Volvo is an event. Oh, I knew a Volvo as an event. And take a trip to New York and buy fancy clothes for Kitty. When I was 17, I noticed that my foster parents were stockpiling away my trust fund money to pay for Kitty's tuition to college. Throughout this time, the banks would never outright say so, but would heavily imply that I owed them, and once I got control of my inheritance, that I should be godly and generous and give them some material compensation for all the work they did to raise me. I think they already got loads of material, especially since Miss Banks practically stole all of my mum's antiques from her store and kept them for herself, gave them to Kitty, or to her other relatives. One thing my mum never kept at her store was an extremely expensive Burlesque era fine china set, absolutely complete and worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a replica, but the real deal. So real, Napoleon Bonaparte himself might well have eaten a steak off those plates. Probably not, but you get the point. It was my china set, of course, but Miss Banks thought I was an idiot and didn't know that. She would always talk about how this china set would go to Kitty on her wedding day. Miss Banks assumed that since I dressed like a tomboy, didn't care about all my mum's antiques that Mrs. Banks stole or gave away, that I just didn't care about the china set. When I was a kid, my mum told me that things were things and not to obsess over them. So having the throw china set for myself wasn't an issue. What was an issue was Mrs. Banks acting like it was hers to give away. Wrong, lady. So once Kitty set off to college thanks to my biological mum and dad's money, I had to make my own plans. I had always done well in school and had actually gotten a partial scholarship to attend school out of the state. The rest I could have easily paid for with my inheritance, which I would very soon have control of. Per usual, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were haranguing me about how I owed them compensation, and since I was going to be rich soon, I ought to share the wealth. I figured that over the past 7 years, they probably stole or misappropriated more than $200,000 of my parents' money, to say nothing of the state money they misused. I think they more than shared the wealth. I never promised anything. I just smiled and kept a tally of every single bank statement I got them quarterly that my trust issued over the years. The bank's family never shared them with me, of course, but when I asked the actual bank for a rundown, they were more than happy to oblige. I also wrote down every single major purchase my foster parents clearly made over the past 7 years with money that was clearly beyond their means as a housewife and an insurance man, such as a $40,000 car for cash, a used $20,000 car for cash that they gave to Kitty, trips to Hawaii, New York, cash gifts to the church that made them look super generous at my deceased parents' expense, kept them all in a nice 3-ring binder. I already arranged my travel to my new campus. I didn't have much stuff at the bank's house anyway, and had zero intention of coming back, at least to their home. The banks knew I was leaving, but didn't bother seeing me off, because they assumed I'd come back to give them their due. I waited for our church's yearly antique sale extravaganza, set to begin in 3 days. Per usual, the banks donated all sorts of random stuff many of it knickknacks that used to belong to my mum and technically belonged to me. They weren't shy about giving away my stuff and taking credit for it. While Mr. and Mrs. Banks were on one of their shopping sprees with my parents' money and away from the house, I boxed up the china set and brought it to church. I told the rummage sale committee that Mrs. Banks wanted to donate the priceless antiques for sale. All benefits go to the church. This donation is made in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Banks. I was being fair. If Mrs. Banks was really so godly, she would be delighted that such a wonderful donation be made in her name. Sadly, I knew she'd go the other way because she was faker than porn star implants. Oh, wow. The ladies were flabbergasted, especially when I told them the appraisal of the set's value. I also told them that if they needed proof of ownership and right to sell, to contact the number of a certain attorney in New York. They thanked me profusely and praised the Lord Jesus for Mrs. Banks' generosity. This would be the most expensive item in their sales history. Everyone knew no one could afford to buy the set outright, but everyone would love to get the pieces piecemeal. Like, I got a cup and saucer. I got one of the chargers. I got an egg cup. The banks were supposed to work the sale the second day, and I wasn't there. What I did hear from my foster mum was that my foster mum went ballistic when she saw her china set for sale, and it was a huge hit, and ladies all over the county had bought pieces of it, and it raised so much money for the church. My foster mum threw a tantrum and said that I had stolen the set from her house. The ladies at the church explained that I had made the donation in her name, and she was getting credit for the donation to the church. My foster mum was practically yanking her hair out, according to what I heard later. She was trying to track down who had bought pieces and tried to get them back. Of course, she was unsuccessful. What she was successful in was looking like a grade A douchebag. The entire church thought she was selfish and materialistic and acting very ungodly, especially the way she cursed her foster daughter. A week later, my foster parents received a package by registered mail from me and my attorney. It contained my binder where I showed my bank statements and also a list of all their spending extravaganzas. It also contained a warning from my attorney that should they ever try to contact me again for money, that they will receive a bill and a court date. That was that. 10 years later, I work as a third grade teacher. I'm married to an accountant. We have a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. Kitty ended up working through college, and as we've gotten older, we've reconnected. She apologized for the way she acted when we were kids. We're friends now and see each other multiple times a year, often just for lunch. She's an elementary school teacher too, and married to an engineer. She has a 4-year-old daughter. Both of our older kids play together when our families meet. We both have our own wedding china. She has gone to therapy, to a lot of therapy due to her toxic parents, she tells me. As for her parents, they still live in their small town because they're too broke to move. Their reputation is of being that couple who drove their children away and stole money from that poor girl whose parents died and tried to steal money from Jesus when they whined about getting their brusque china back. I hope your Volvo was worth it, a-holes. Gotta love it when I want to take this child in and take all her money away. Like, I deserve the money because I am doing good things for God. No. That's not how it works. How it will work is I'm going to be ending the episode here though. Links will be in the description to my main channel and also the second channel where there's links on the screen to the playlist and the last episode. Don't go check them out. Go check them out. At this point, it's over 100. It's like at 100 episodes. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when the next video comes out. Ding, ding. I'm the Mad Scientist. Mad Scientist out.